I'm Shana Hagan, and I'm a cinematographer.
Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Art, the podcast where we get up close and personal as we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. This is Season 2, Episode 29. My guest this week is the award-winning cinematographer Shana Hagan, ASC. In the words of fellow cinematographer Gretchen Wathen, Shana is the biggest documentary female DP/operator in the world, and one of the kindest DPs I have ever worked with on set. You would never know who she is in the cinematography world without looking her up. Shana's work includes DPing in the 1997 Oscar-winning documentary short Breathing Lessons, The Life and Work of Mark O'Brien, and shooting additional cinematography for the 2014 Oscar-winning Best Documentary Feature, 20 Feet from Stardom. She worked on the Oscar-nominated 2010 documentary Food, Inc., and DP'd the 2020 Oscar-nominated documentary short Walk, Run, Cha-Cha, as well as the 2005 Sundance Film Festival Awards special Jury Prize winner After Innocence, and the 2012 Sundance Film Festival Award Grand Jury Prize nominee, The Queen of Versailles. With this prestigious resume, Shana has firmly embedded herself in the industry. Shana was born in Phoenix, Arizona, to parents Dr. Robert Hagan and Peggy Hagan, a Girl Scout camp director and troop leader. Shana is the middle of 3 children, and her parents instilled many important values in her which have helped her throughout her life and career. As a schoolgirl, she became a competitive swimmer at the age of 5 through to her freshman year at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, where she attended film school. It was a natural career path for the enthusiastic young photographer who had already developed a keen eye for filmmaking. Shana was the official family videographer with a curious mind, an appetite for storytelling, and a passion that grew as she established the foundation for her craft, opening doors and creating opportunities right out of school. Shana was the first woman to shoot on the hit reality series Survivor, and was nominated for an Emmy for her work on Survivor China. She shot 4 seasons on NBC's Parks and Recreation, was the second unit DP on Netflix's Arrested Development, and has shot commercial spots for Disney, Electronic Arts, Kohl's, the US Army, Kodak, Verizon, and many others. Shana's current scripted work includes the critically acclaimed Peabody Award-winning series Somebody Somewhere for HBO, and Fox's half-hour docu-comedy Welcome to Flatch. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband Peter, daughter Iris, 2 dogs, and 2 cats. Shana, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to talk with you.
Well, I am excited to hear your story because, as you know, you were introduced by our friend Gretchen Wathen, who had some very nice things to say about you. She says you're one of the best she's a friend and a mentor, she said. And she's also the best documentary female DP operator in the world. That's quite a title.
Wow. Gretchen's a wonderful friend, and, I will mail her the check that I owe. No, I'm kidding. She's an amazing woman. One thing I like about Gretchen, too, is I'll throw the compliments right back at her. She's an incredible supporter of women. I think a lot of people have preconceived notions about women in our film industry, that we're super competitive, and of course we are, but we're also incredibly supportive of each other. We also have we all have a similar journey, and in that we have to kind of, a lot of us have had to work really hard to get where we are. And each step along in our way in our careers, we've just really, really worked really, really hard. And I think that women recognize that in other women. And so I think there's a supportive nature there. And Gretchen is literally the most supportive, cinematographer that I know, who really supports and encourages and She has Lady Camera Guy, which is, has tens of thousands of followers all over the world and is really just all about giving visibility to women in the camera department. And I love that. It's just literally she's just sharing people's photos of them at work and really just giving them a platform to say, here we are, we're doing this and we're, I love her. And I love, that she's again supporting women in the camera department because we all have stories to tell. We all see the world differently. We all come from different perspectives. And I love that about her and about what I do too, is that we all have, a unique way of seeing the world. And I love the cinematography can allow that for women to kind of tell their stories uniquely, so anyway, that was a long-winded answer to say I love Gretchen too. So
well, we love to share the love on this show. And one thing that is important, I think, in this industry as much as anything, Shana, is that we have to lower the ladder for the upcoming generations to
for sure
maybe overcome the hurdles a lot easier than maybe you did, because you've been in the industry for a few decades, shall we say, not to give too much away, yes. But your IMDb does actually give that away, that the kind of runway you've had in the industry. Is that when you look at your IMDb profile, what's missing there for you?
That's a really interesting question. I think early on, there was a lot of work that was sort of uncredited. I mean, I'm not one to want to rack up credits just for racking up credits. But I think some of my early work was never really credited. Also, I think there's some on my IMDb that show that I'm actually I was an assistant editor right out of film school. I couldn't find a job, that would pay me to shoot. I was doing a lot of freebies, a lot of, shooting, going back a little bit. I had a mentor in film school, just right out of film school, that said, look, shoot anything you could get your hands on. If you got to shoot, if you want to go direct, you got to direct. If you want to edit, you got to edit. So I wanted to shoot. So I found anything I could to shoot. If it was free, freebie or, just even, I remember getting paid once with some sort of a barter job that I got paid with an old, back in the day, it was actually a new for me, but an old Mac Plus. It was like a ancient Mac computer, but that was my first computer. But I got paid for the job. It was a few days of interviews on a documentary or whatever, and they paid me with this computer. I was like, sure, and so I was doing anything I could to kind of get my foot in the door and get experience shooting. But I wasn't really able to make a living. And so on the other, during the week, I would be an assistant editor. And right out of film school, I took a job called on a film called Hearts of Darkness, which was the making of Apocalypse Now. And I was the assistant editor. I was tasked with, kind of going through all the footage. This was the making of Apocalypse Now. So going through footage, I was also very interested in documentaries. And so I kind of took it reluctantly, saying, okay, if you guys let me shoot on the weekends, on my own stuff, as long as it's during the week, I'll be an assistant editor during the week. And then on the weekends, I'll shoot. And, little did I know I was going to be learning how a documentary was crafted in the edit room, and watching documentary footage, being shot, the making of a feature film that was incredibly pivotal in my film school years. Watching Apocalypse Now, the Vittorio Storaro's cinematography in that film is incredible, and kind of made me appreciate the job of a cinematographer and how those visuals help tell the story emotionally, and just incredible to be able to again work as an assistant editor on this making of Apocalypse Now. But then also just seeing how a documentary was crafted. I was very vocal and said, hey, I can shoot. So I ended up shooting a couple interviews for the documentary. I was also a camera assistant on the new interviews that they shot with Francis Coppola and Martin Sheen. So not only being on set with those interviews and watching the documentary cinematographer like those interviews, how they it just was all well-rounded. It was almost like my grad school. It was pretty amazing. And then from there, I actually continued my assistant editing work at National Geographic, which was another great avenue for me to be able to watch documentary cinematography, literally in the edit room after they've shot it. I was tasked with, putting all this footage together and then assisting an editor to put the cut scenes together. And it was incredible, and very formative in my young cinematographer brain to see how an editor uses raw documentary footage to create a scene and create a larger, feature film.
You were splicing and dicing in those days.
I was, and again, during those jobs, I was like, I was kind of lamenting, like, I'm not shooting, but I was shooting on the weekends. I was continuing to shoot. So a job that I had at National Geographic, it was a film called Great White Shark, and I remember Paul and Gracie Atkins. They were the filmmakers, and they would every once in a while, we were working on a film. A filmmaker named Jessica Yu and I were doing a film called Breathing Lessons. It was a documentary short about a man who, Mark O'Brien, who was had a severe disability, was a quadriplegic living in an iron lung. And it was basically just a day in the life of what a severely disabled man, what his life was like. And we were shooting, and we would go up and do these long weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So every few weeks I would say, hey, Paul and Gracie, the directors of this National Geographic documentary, can I go and take a Friday off and drive up? He lives in Berkeley. We'd drive to LA to Berkeley, shoot a few days, come back. And then we'd, get the dailies back, figure out what else we need. And we would go to, every couple times a month for a few months. And they were incredibly supportive. They said, of course, you're a shooter. You're not assistant editor. You're going to want to be assistant editor the rest of your life. And they were very, very supportive. And eventually that film, again, called Breathing Lessons, it ended up winning an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short in 1996. And I think the lesson there was, for me, was that it was like, hey, I could still, have a day job, to pay the bills, but also like, working for very little money on these documentary shorts during the weekends, just burning the candle at both ends to try to really pursue my cinematography. And once that documentary really hit sort of, we went to Sundance and then got into some other festivals, entered into the Academy Awards. We ended up winning. That year, it was like, that was the year that was like, what, maybe I can, use this as a springboard into really taking myself seriously and shooting more. And, so I stopped the assistant editing, didn't need to do any more assistant editing. It wasn't like the phone rang, oh my God, you're working for the next 365, days this year. It was not, that, but it was enough of a confidence boost to say, hey, you've done well, you've put in your dues. You've learned a lot in the edit room. Now it's time to go and take all that knowledge that you've learned and go and shoot. Spread your wings and let's fly. So it was pretty amazing, and honestly, like looking back now, that's a lot of, 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. But everything that I learned in the edit room, I still use to this day. Every day I shoot, I use all the things that I learned in the edit room about how to craft a scene, how to craft a sequence, long shots, wide shots, inserts, all the rest, and pacing, and, all the rest I learned in an edit room, sitting aside, an editor. I still use all of what I learned in the edit room every day I shoot. So, looking back, I really look at my time in the edit room very fondly. So,
well, that's lesson number one from Shana Hagan is do every job in the industry. Right. When you start, just get in everywhere, roll your sleeves up and do absolutely everything, because it does pay off in the long run. You can always use those, and every skill that you learn is never wasted, is it?
It's not, and again, like, at the time that I was like, again, lamenting that I wasn't getting paid to shoot. But in hindsight, it was exactly where I needed to be, and exactly what I needed to be doing is meeting people too. I just recently reconnected with Paul Atkins, the filmmaker at National Geographic, who had given me those Fridays off, to then go and shoot Breathing Lessons that, all of these that sort of snowballed. And he'd realized, and I think when we won, I think they were very supportive, very happy, but I hadn't connected with him in over 20 years. And he was just so, shared that story again with him, and he was just so, of course, we knew that you had skills, and we wanted to nurture that. And I was just like so grateful for him and for he and his wife that were so supportive back then. But it is you take something from every job that you do. Even now in my career, there's always something new I want to learn. Something, sometimes I take jobs because I haven't done X, Y, or Z, or I haven't worked with, this person or that person. There's always something new that I want to learn. I always want to be expanding my knowledge base or my network. And there's always room to learn new things,
And also gear.
Yes. Gear is changing daily. It seems like, technology is changing. We have so many different tools in the toolbox now. We've got, you've got your LED walls and, virtual spaces that, you can shoot in. And, for me, it's exciting. In the last few years, I've been using a lot of my documentary skills in the narrative world, which is something I've always really wanted to do. And now, there's a lot of new stories that are being told using kind of a documentary form in the narrative world, or using documentary documentary elements, say handheld or naturalistic lighting, and all of that stuff that I'm bringing from my documentary world into the scripted world. It's a unique kind of perspective that a lot of people are really taking to, and I love that. So it's sort of pushing me into new territory, which I love, because it's just, again, the sort of expansion and like what's next. I'm always looking for the what's next. How can I, what can I learn? What can I explore next? That's the exciting part of my job, is that it's never the same thing twice. Oftentimes you do recall things, and you take what you've learned, from previous experiences and apply it to your work. But there's always something about the discovery, the sense of discovery that I love, that keeps me fresh and keeps me excited about learning new things and trying new projects. And again, I love meeting people. I love meeting, in the documentary world, you meet so many incredible people, not only in the production part of it, but also, your subjects, your characters in these documentaries. I mean, it's, you name it. I've done open heart surgeries in Kazakhstan, or animators, doing their thing here in LA, or, just, I could name 8,000 different types of documentaries that I've done, that every story is impactful and insightful. And I learn something from every job that I do. So not only, yes, the technical, the new skills, but also like these life experiences too, that I enjoy. So it's great. I love what I do, and I love, doing new things every day. And I am repeating myself, but I feel like the exploration, the discovery is what keeps it fresh. So if I can find projects that really encourage that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, well, that has to push the creative process, doesn't it? The fascination, the appetite to learn along the way. If you don't do that, you don't build your creativity, do you? You need to have that open mind and that appetite, that hunger to learn and grow and broaden your palette.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think from a technical standpoint, that's definitely true. But also, yes, this personal appetite for, I love to pursue things that I'm naturally curious about, because I love to learn. I love to, whether that came from my parents sort of encouraging me to kind of discover whatever, is like natural curiosity about flowers or swimming or movies or documentaries or like carpentry or like, whatever it is, or knitting, anything, just like dive into it and learn about it and find like, kind of stop questioning the why, or, why you're doing this, but just follow that natural curiosity. And that's what I love about documentaries, is that most of the time it is just that you're following this natural curiosity about a subject. And, case in point, like I did a film called The Kingmaker. It was about Imelda Marcos. And, I had my preconceived notions about, the wife of a former dictator, and I was conflicted. I think all of us were, but I was also very naturally curious about her and about what this woman was like. And so using that natural curiosity, so, we had some really, really incredible, amazing verite days with her, just again, following her around and using that natural curiosity about what is the life of the wife of the former dictator like, what is her life like, and who is this woman? And that was a very interesting shoot. And again, this natural curiosity is what drives me for sure.
Or didn't she have the largest shoe collection known to woman?
I believe she did. Yes, she had an obsession with shoes. Yes, and I think when she left the U.S., there were several that were left behind, and it's pretty interesting. If you follow the story, it's actually quite a little bit of a cautionary tale for us here in the U.S. about how she helped her family come back into power in the Philippines, and what that is. I mean, without getting too deep in the political, it was definitely an interesting film about, this family kind of rediscovering their power in the Philippines after such a sort of notably horrific past. But in any case, yes, she had a shoe collection.
Indeed, famously.
And, and she is funny. I don't think I can share a photo there. When we first arrived at Mrs. Marcos's place in Manila, she had an entire American food, quote unquote, American food spread for us. We were excited to have, because she wanted to make us lunch or have lunch with us before we started shooting. And we were expecting, full Filipino spread. And instead she had hot dogs and hamburgers and pizza, and French fries. We're like, ooh, we politely ate a few, but then we start shooting. But it was, a lovely gesture, but interesting nonetheless. But in any case, yes, this natural curiosity, I love the documentary world feeds that for me for sure. And the scripted world too. I mean, you get a script and, you have already written pages, but you're sort of, tasked with, elevating that script visually, and heightening emotion or highlighting emotion that is, and just finding the story beats and kind of, in my narrative work, often I'm using the handheld in a way that's sort of very responsive or reactive to emotions in a scene. And so even though we're sort of doing things with very specific blocking, coordinated blocking, both camera and actors, there still needs to, in my work, I like to still have a sense of curiosity or a sense of spontaneity in my work. And so I think a lot of people have responded to that in a way that it feels kind of like a documentary, but it's not really, it sort of feels approachable. I like the idea that a camera is handheld in a scripted scene. Like a show like Somebody Somewhere, we just finished season 3, and I really am proud of my work in that show because I feel like it's, again, we chose handheld from the beginning because it feels like the story needs to be as if there is a friend in the room. There's a lot of heavy scenes, a lot of funny scenes, but there's a lot of heavy scenes. And we like the idea that the camera's handheld and it sort of gives it a little bit more of a less mechanical, more personal feel behind the camera. So there's a human behind the camera, even though there's not, we're never like breaking the fourth wall and there's never like a, moment where you see the person behind the camera, but it's more a vibe or a feeling where you see it's a little handheld, and therefore it gives me some opportunity to react too. If somebody's zigging and I'm zagging, there's some interesting interaction too between camera and character. And so it's nice to be able to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more reactive. So speaking of natural curiosity, it's sort of like sometimes I let myself kind of go a little bit in the handheld in some of these scripted scenes where I want to walk in a little bit to kind of accentuate a heavy moment or back off a little bit to give a character a little bit more space, or, just kind of integrate some of the documentary techniques again that surviving the emotion of a scene, using the camera as kind of a fluid, kind of a reactive, anyway, I'm getting way into the weeds here with my narrative cinematography.
Happy for you to get into the weeds, Shana, anytime.
It's hard to, it's interesting to try to articulate creative process in a verbally, I mean, I'm a very, very, and I'm sure most artists that you interview are like we're very visual people, or very, I can, I love looking at the, I have a picture of me with one of my first cameras. It's a toy camera, but I think I'm 2 years old and I'm holding a camera. And I remember as a child, my mom, as an adult, my mom told me this, but I remember also as a child, I'd love to look through a camera. I loved to curate my world through the viewfinder of a camera, whether it be a toy camera or, my mother's brownie camera or whatever. But for some reason, I was very drawn to the intimacy or the personal nature of looking at the world through a viewfinder. It was just my own world. It was just something I was choosing to look at, a flower or my dog or my sister or my brother or my parents or something, like just choosing to work, I love that concept. And so then here I am, however many decades later, I'm doing this for a living and I love it. It's fantastic.
Well, I'm glad you stepped back there because I did want to rewind the film. As you know, on this show, we do go back all the way to your earliest memories, Shana, because you were born March the 3rd in Phoenix, Arizona, which is blazing hot at the best of times, and yes. You're still in a very warm climate there in LA. But what were your very earliest memories of growing up in Phoenix?
We had a pool in Phoenix, and I think most suburban homes had pools in Phoenix. And I just remember having the best time in the pool. I learned to swim at a very young age as a competitive swimmer from about age 5 through freshman year in college. So I swam for many, many years. And that was one way to stay cool. But some of my earliest memories were definitely at home with the family. my dad was a big roughhouser in the pool. And so, but I also loved, some of my earlier memories with cameras were my uncle was a world traveler. He worked for an oil company and lived in oil producing countries all around the world, Saudi Arabia. He was in South America. He was in Canada for a while and had several cameras. And I remember him, I want to say third grade, had given me like a camera, knowing that I was really interested in cameras, gave me an old 35 millimeter camera. And I had no idea what to do. I mean, I think he kind of showed me, but I'm like, a 10 or something, and I just taught myself. My mom encouraged me to kind of, load up a roll of film and kind of figure out, so several rolls of film later, I was like, oh, this is what this does. Oh, this is what this does, and I went to the library, looked up, how to, whatever, and just sort of taught myself, not to say I taught myself, but I did actually like experiment with photography with a 35 millimeter camera. And then taking it one step further, my father was also into gadgets, and he bought like a very early version of a VHS recorder. And I remember, kind of filming, family gatherings and things, and just being sort of already documenting, taking a step back to, I just recently found an audio cassette that I had recorded a rainstorm out our front door. In Arizona, we had these beautiful, wonderful monsoon storms that would just rain buckets, but the loud thunder and the rain. And I was transfixed by the audio of this sound. And I was like, I need to record this. So I took our little, cassette recorder with like, just an old cassette recorder. And I just hit record and sat there for a good half hour until the tape ran out. And I just found that cassette, and I was like, I didn't even have a player to play it in, but I was like, I have to keep this. I have to digitize this. But it was just an example of, for some reason, I loved to record the world around me. I loved, I'm not sure why, but again, this sort of natural curiosity about like the recording medium, that I could record special moments in my life. I could record those and maybe keep them to either listen to later, or just to say like, this was an important moment in my life, this rainstorm. And I remember sitting there recording it, but also just being there in that moment for a half an hour. My family was all inside. They were like, oh, I don't want to get wet. But I was like, this is amazing. The sound of the raindrops in the puddles in the front, and then the wind and the trees and the thunder. And it just was amazing. I loved being in that moment. And so having this little tape cassette was like a reminder to me that I just found it literally a couple of months ago. And I was like, this is amazing. As a little kid, I was like documenting, I was a documentary sort of, documentary person back then, documenting our family and audio of the rainstorms and all the rest. But really some early memories, I again, with the cameras and that audio cassette. I composed some music. I remember one time for a science fair, and have that. I also found that cassette, an original composition called My Organ, because I'd received a little organ for Christmas a few years previous, and just had this very rudimentary composition that I had made and won a blue ribbon, but I had that cassette recorded too. I don't know. I was very interested in recording, audio, video, and taking stills, and I don't know. I was just very interested. Again, my father's a doctor. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and very active in volunteering. And she was a Girl Scout leader, Girl Scout camp director, very, very involved with, in leadership roles. And that was an incredible, learning for me, and how valuable volunteering and seeing her, shine in those roles. I was a Girl Scout counselor as well, very involved with Girl Scouts, a Girl Scout counselor. And my dad was very involved with the Boy Scouts. And I don't know, just a really wholesome, very lovely upbringing. And I don't live in Arizona for a reason, because it's so hot. So, but happy to be in LA. I visit home. Both my parents have passed, and my brother passed as well. I have a younger brother. My sister is still around, and she is a physician in Phoenix. Still quite happy in Phoenix. So,
but you were one of three. You were the middle child, and you mentioned how your father was a family physician. What was your relationship like with both of your parents?
Yes, my dad. Again, the sort of roughhouser. It was like good cop, bad cop. My dad was always the joker and the roughhouser in the pool, and really just the guy who was he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. Unfortunately, he passed when I was about 21, so I didn't get to know him too much as an adult. So most of my memories are, as a kid, but very, very passionate, very uh, really passionate about helping people. He, as a physician, he was very, very keen on making sure he was very, very involved with his patients in terms of, follow up. Also, he's very, very old school in the sense that he, even into the 80s, was accepting barter as payment, which I'm not sure even is allowed now. But I mean,
I love that. How many doctors today would do that?
So we as a family would go to, say, John Smith had a restaurant and, he may have had issues paying his bill or maybe just wanted to offer dad as a payment, hey, please come, whenever you want to have dinner with your family. And so we'd go to these people's homes, these people's restaurants and, of course the guy was there and he's, giving us this and this and this. So it's just like this sense of goodwill and community and supporting the community. And, this guy and his wife were running the restaurant. I remember this like Italian restaurant or something. His name's not John Smith, but some Italian restaurant that we would go to quite frequently. And I think that was one of the people who would, pay for his medical services with food to our family. And so we'd go and, it was just a wonderful feeling. And I love that, that sort of old school, almost like country doctor, and again, he had such a way with people. One of the wonderful memories that I have of my father, and I will try not to cry because he did die when I was 21, and he had this wonderful way of making people feel at ease almost instantly. So somebody who was a little anxious in a any kind of environment, he would just instantly flash a smile or say something funny or complimentary to them to really just make them feel at ease very instantly, like just somehow had a real sense of treating people with kindness and just again this instant ability to just make people feel really, really good about themselves. And therefore, relieving all the stress, because people come to the doctor and they stress out or something. And he just has this really great way with people. And I feel like I took that from him. I learned that from him. That, in my documentary work, I think one of the things that is tantamount is trust. And I think early on, even before we start shooting on most projects, most directors I've worked with that I really love working with, we go in and talk with the subjects without the camera. We develop a trust, and there's a certain sense of, there's a person with a camera on your shoulder, that's like filming you. You want to make sure that person really feels comfortable with you. And so oftentimes, we go, even if I'm going on, just a day shoot or something, I try to say hello and just, introduce myself. And again, try to make people feel at ease. It pays off in spades, that trust and that kind of understanding, that sort of very basic interpersonal communication from the get-go, just being a nice person, being kind, being trustworthy, being honest, all of those things I learned from my father, and again, making people feel at ease very quickly is something that I learned from him. Again, my mother was an incredible leader. I think she was able to, I was shielded a lot from a lot of the politics of the sort of local Girl Scout, kind of councils and things. But, what the result was this really fun experience for so many Girl Scouts. She was a camp director for many years up in Northern Arizona at a Girl Scout camp. And, hundreds of girls, if not thousands of girls, had incredible, camp stays, under her watch. And I loved kind of watching her lead and be in charge. And that was also something I took from my mother, is how to be a good leader and how to work with people to get the best out of them, how to encourage people to do their best. So those two skills, not only making people feel at ease from my father, but also, fantastic leadership and allowing people to do their best skills. That's what I use those skills as a director of photography, cinematographer, in my daily life, my daily work life. My daily life in general too. I think the person I am is because obviously these two wonderful humans raised me, but I also think those skills in the work environment are very the profession that I chose. Those two particular skills, good leadership, and again making people feel at ease quite easily or quite quickly, are something I use in my work life every day.
Oh, when did your mother pass away?
She died in 2011. She had this. I tell the story. Another sort of sad story. Both my parents died quite quickly, which in hindsight is fantastic. If you're going to go, just go. I had a dear friend die 2 years ago after a very long battle with cancer, after 5 or 6 years, and she was miserable in the last year of her life. And she and I talked about how she probably would have enjoyed just going out, but she did, it was nice to be able to have sort of the long goodbye. But my mother had a really wonderful party when she turned 75. My parents were both like, they had a half century party when they turned 50. They had my mother had a 2/3 of a century party when she turned 66 and 2/3. And then she had a 3/4 of a century party when she turned 75. And she invited everybody she knew, everybody she wanted. There was 200 people at her party at our modest 4-bedroom, suburban house in Phoenix. She'd, pushed all the furniture aside and gotten a jazz band and a chocolate fountain and, caterer and valet parking. And because she was like, where are all my older friends going to park? They don't want to walk in the dark, so she had everything. She just pulled out all the stuff, just like, just everything was perfect. And she worked at a church. I know this is a little, roundabout, but she worked at a church, and she often commented that people who were gathering for funerals were saying, why didn't we not do this sooner? Like, why didn't we do this when the person was alive? And so she took it upon herself at her 75th birthday party and said, please, everybody come. I'm not dying anytime soon, but I want to have a party, and I want everybody to come. And so that was her big thing. She wanted to be around and have this big party. 2 weeks later, she fell asleep. We're not quite sure why, but she didn't wake up. I believe she had some issue, maybe some undiagnosed sleep apnea or a heart condition that we didn't know about. It wasn't anything that showed up in the autopsy either, but her heart just stopped. But if you're going to go, why not have a giant party for yourself? Invite everybody, have a jazz band, a chocolate fountain, the whole 9 yards. She even commented to my sister and I that it felt like your funeral, but she was there. And we were both thinking, wow, that's very morbid. But in hindsight, maybe it was, something that she knew. But if you're going to go, again, have a giant party for yourself and then maybe go to sleep and then just not wake up. It's sort of maybe the most painless way for yourself. It was certainly really challenging for my siblings and I, but, she had a good life. She had a lot of years ahead of her. We had planned on a trip to Hawaii a few months later, but, she was not planning to die for sure, but her heart just stopped. So, a lesson in living life every day, to its fullest. And, not to take anything, for granted. Also, anybody's listening, please call your parents and all your family who are still alive and tell them that you love them, because you never know when they're not going to be there. So, but yeah, my mom, yeah.
So speaking of that, you're now a mother yourself, and
Yes.
I'm sure you wish that your mother had met your daughter Iris, of course.
Yes.
But what do you miss about what she obviously gave you so much in your life, showed you by example. And once she's gone, that example's no longer there as a daily reference for you. So what sort of takeaways will you keep close to your heart now as you raise your own child?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and also hard to not start to cry about the fact that she's not here to meet this beautiful young daughter.
I apologize for that.
No. It's wonderful. I can't remember which celebrity. I saw this on social media recently, that grief is when emotion comes up when you're grieving something. It's also still the love that's still within you. So it's not a sad thing. It's a wonderful memory of the person that's still with you. I mean, my parents are still with me. My brother's still with me. My friend who passed 2 years ago is still with me. And I think my mother was always very spontaneous but also very much a traditionalist. So she would want to do things new most every year, but also want to do them as if she loved tradition. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, like she always would like to do things kind of the way they were the previous year, also with a new twist. So I feel like, we're doing that with our daughter, that like, we've only had one so far. We have the first Christmas, we've had the first, Thanksgiving was just a blur because she was a week old, so but I think we'll do our Christmases, our Thanksgivings, those traditions that we had this beautiful childhood. We would spend summers, a few weeks every summer. We'd spend at my grandma and grandpa's farm, in Oklahoma. We'd go right around July 4th. And so, fireworks were illegal in Arizona, but they weren't in Oklahoma. So we'd be able to light off fireworks in the barn or outside the barn. And I remember just going to all the July 4th, the parade and the turtle race, all these like really beautiful childhood memories. I want that for my daughter. I appreciated all the things that my parents did to, we had wonderful family trips. We did Hawaii, New York, we did Washington, D.C. We did all these things as family. And I know for them, it was incredible, an incredible expense and to get the time off and all the rest and lots of, with 3 kids traveling. And we did some of the trips when my brother was quite young and still in a stroller. So we were all 4 years apart. But those trips are seared into my memory as wonderful times with the family. And I want that for my daughter is to have, as even she's young now, but we've already gone to Disneyland and, she probably won't remember anything, previous to like 3 or 4 years, but we have lots of pictures and lots of memories for us. But as she gets older, we want to instill that same love of travel, that love of adventure, that love of, again, natural curiosity. Like, I think that was always encouraged. We also did a family trip to Hawaii so I feel like all the things that my parents had done, we're really hoping to do with our daughter as well. And, it's a wonder to be a parent. Yes, I'm sad that she's not around. My husband's mother is also passed. Both his parents are passed. So we have some adopted grandparents, older cousins and things that are sort of, and I have an uncle that's sort of the grandpa, figure. So we've got some stand-in family where there isn't, blood grandparents around. But, I think that's one thing too, that in this day and age, and as being older parents, you sort of create your family, right? You create, a found family that if there's not family still around, there are plenty of really, really supportive friends and other family that will stand in those roles.
Were you close to your grandparents at all? Often we have one grandparent that becomes, the best mate when you're growing up. Did you have that?
We didn't. My parents lived distant from my grandparents, but I did. I loved both my grandmothers. I didn't know my father's father died also quite young too. So I was not, had already passed by the time all of the kids were born. So, but my mother's parents, I remember quite fondly. They were the ones in Oklahoma. So they were always, kind of, had retired on a small farm. Just some pastured cows, things like that. And my grandmother, on my mother's side was just a hoot. She was just a firecracker and I loved her. She was amazing. I think of the 2 grandmothers, I think she was definitely she was a spitfire, and I love the sort of spunk and spontaneity, and even at, 80, when she passed, she was still cracking jokes and, but then on the other side, really, really progressive, for her age, in terms of human civil rights and all the rest, which is very impactful to me. And on my father's side too, my grandmother actually came to live with us, during the winters. They lived in Wisconsin, my uncle and my grandmother on my father's side. And so she would come down during the harsh winters in Wisconsin and live with us in Phoenix for a couple of months. Stayed with my brother in his room and when he was quite little. And I would remember she was a fantastic baker. She was from Hungary, an incredible baked goods. And my dad would just light up like a little kitty Christmas whenever she would make a poppy seed strudel or an apple pie, or she'd make donuts by hand, and those kind of fun memories. But she was really lovely, really wonderful, very warm. And her love language is food for sure. So that's something that I've taken from her.
Is that your love language?
It is, unfortunately. It is. It's one of them for sure. But I definitely took that from my grandmother. It's interesting that you bring all this up, because it's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about. But I love recollecting, who I am today is because of these people and because the love they gave us, whether it's love of, the food that they shared with us, or the stories, or the spunk, or the being very progressive to civil rights. I remember my grandmother, just it's and again, both my parents just being so wonderful and loving, and all the traits that I've gotten from them. It's interesting to sort of, verbalize this, because you don't really talk about it in this way. But I thank you for bringing it all up, because it's like it's making me like, hey, I am this person because of all these people, and yeah.
I'm just curious though, if you've become a bit of a firecracker yourself, would you regard yourself as a Spitfire?
You know what? I think I am, but also like I'm not quite as
spunky.
I'm certainly spunky, but I do it I kind of channel it and funnel it into my work. And one of the things I love about, my documentary work is that I can be spunky. I can make great change and affect great change with my work. So choosing to work on projects that are issues, or, I worked on an amazing, documentary about, 4 Native American families in the late 90s. And it's about Native issues without, bonking people over the head about, the atrocities that American society has cast upon Native cultures, for hundreds of years. So that's my contribution to, and it's a beautiful story. It's called Homeland. It's a beautiful film about these 4 Native families over a period of 3 years living on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And the trials and tribulations and the happinesses and the sadnesses and all the life that happens on the res. And so in my own way, that sort of maybe my spitfire, my spunkiness, it, again, comes through in my work. But I don't know. I like to, with my daughter, we've done a lot of spontaneous things. That's a good question. Maybe I am the spitfire then in the, I like that. I get pretty fired up about certain things. So I did take that from her. From my grandma.
Well, that leads me very nicely to ask what you took away from your parents and your family upbringing in terms of religion and politics. How did they shape you?
That's an interesting question too. One of my grandmothers was a devout Catholic. Another was sort of not devout, but church-going Christians. I'm slightly non-religious, but very spiritual. I'd studied some Buddhism. I was baptized in a Christian church, went to church quite regularly when we were children. Kind of stopped going because I'm not really a big organized religion person. I don't like to be told what to do and what to say and how to do it and this and that. But I took from a lot of that the spirituality, and kind of that there is a sense of, a sense of my purpose, but also potentially a larger purpose or a larger being that's helping all of humankind. That said, I also am a big believer of lots of different beliefs. And so Buddhism, reincarnation, past lives, I'm open to, there's too many coincidences and too many things that have happened to me in my life that I took for me not to sort of be open to a lot of different faiths and spirituality and sort of components to that. So I'm open to a lot. I don't claim to be, again, religious, but I think the fact that my parents were so open or so kind of traditionalists in the church environment, but also very open to whatever we wanted to believe. I loved that they encouraged that for us, that they were not, saying you need to do this. This is what we're going to do if you want to join us. And oftentimes we didn't go to church, or they would go, but we wouldn't, or, for whatever reason, or we'd go the next weekend. But so it wasn't like compulsory, but it was just something that, they also were very vocal about what it did for them. And their sense of belonging to a church is also about community, which I really love. So faith for them was one component, but also the community that it created for them was another, which I saw and appreciated. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think one thing I want to say too is I went to Bhutan in a search for my own spirituality. I kind of went to Bhutan. I'd been studying Buddhism and meditation for a few years, and I just decided to go to Bhutan on a whim. And I was like, let's go. You haven't gone on a trip in a while. And, I used to do these like solo trips and just go for a few weeks. And I hadn't done one in a while, probably 15 years. And so I said, let's go. And so I went to Bhutan for about 3.5 weeks. And over the festival December, January, there was a lot of festivals in Bhutan. And just also one of the things I want to do is just rediscover my love for still photography. And so that trip was a very, very sort of spiritual trip, but also, again, rediscovering the sense of my love of still photography. And sometimes I use my camera to go to places where I would be too shy to go into, or too shy to, I was like, no, I need to get some photos of this. This is amazing. I want to experience it first without a camera, but then also I'd like to document it for, like, going back to my childhood. Like, I love this place. I want to be able to document it and for my own sake, but also to show people the amazing beauty of Bhutan. I mean, there's like, at the time, the year I went was 2010, I believe it was 2009, 2010. It's been a while. But at the time that year, there was only like 25,000 people were visiting, like, a year. So it was very, very, I didn't see very many tourists at all. I love going to places like that too. I love the road less traveled. I love exploring places that not a lot of people have been. And maybe that it might be a little difficult to go around, to drive, say, like 100 miles would take us an entire day because the roads were so bad, or so narrow and windy. But just to go and, again, rediscover my love of photography. I got some really beautiful images from that trip, and just the beautiful people I met, and just driving, very slowly on a 2-lane road, just passing just beautiful, these sandhill cranes that were like, the whole country is just incredibly gorgeous. I love the motto of Bhutan also is they don't have a lot of exports, but they do want to make sure that everybody's happy. So I believe it's like the national goal is to make everybody's happy, make sure everybody's happy. The national quotient of happiness is a real big deal for them, which I love, because it's like, what better thing in life than whatever you end up doing, as long as you're happy, then the rest of the world will be a good place, so. But I loved my trip. So that was a combination, again, of sort of the spiritual and rediscovering some spiritual kind of things and meditation. And then also really taking advantage of the beautiful photography opportunities there. So that was a wonderful trip that I took.
Well, your life obviously is all about the images that you're creating. I'm wondering where the words fit in. Did your parents encourage you to read much? Are you a reader now?
I am not much of a reader. It's so interesting that the books that I read sometimes are about photographers. So, like, there's a Dorothy Lang or an Ansel Adams, or, it's interesting that I'm reading about photography and reading about their process and their lives. And so oftentimes I read technical manuals, like there's very quickly. But sometimes it's interesting that whether it's something in my own brain or just the fact that I'm incredibly visual, is that when I read a novel, I'll start to visualize it, and then I get a little lost and distracted. So I watch a lot of things. I don't watch too much now with an 8-month-old, but not a lot of time there. But I'm not a voracious reader. My mother was, and my sister is. But for me, I'm often looking at pictures. I'm looking at picture books, photo books. Like I often, again, examine Ansel Adams' work. More importantly, Dorothy Lang's work. She was a photographer during and has her sort of noted work is particularly Migrant Mother, which is one of her famous images from the Depression. So shot of a very weary mother with several children that she's holding, and she's obviously in some distress during the Depression. I think it's in somewhere in the Dust Bowl in California. And but I just love the sometimes not reading it, I just absorbing that image and feeling the emotion of that image, and then also reading a little bit. I've been reading this book, Dorothy Lang, and she's talking about the process of taking that photo. I just love kind of reading not only am I interested about photographers or artists and their creative process, but also the story behind that image, So I'm constantly sort of, that's what I'm reading right now, is actually this Dorothy Lang book.
I'm curious as to what you were watching when you were a child or a young adult, Shana, and what you're watching now. It seems to me there might not be too much difference.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's a lot of documentaries. So we watched, on occasion we would watch, the classic Little House on the Prairie. And that was like formative for me, because I was very into, spending time at the farm with grandparents. I was very interested in old timey days and like, how kids were, growing up in pioneer days. And so, and I grew up around, we had the bicentennial. So it was a really big deal for young kids back then to dress up as pioneer, from 200 years ago, whatever. So Little House on the Prairie was pretty formative for me. But I also remember like formatively, there were documentaries on, I believe it was Sunday afternoon, Sunday night. There were the Mutual of Omaha's like Wild Kingdom, which was sort of usually documentaries, natural history documentaries that were sometimes crafted from original footage, but oftentimes like looking back, probably stock footage, cut together creatively to, create a story, whatever. But there was natural history. There was like, animals and, hippos in the wild, whatever. And then then there would be a documentary, like a Walt Disney documentary about, the foxes or so again, natural history, but sometimes documentaries about, people doing interesting things. And I just remember watching, I loved like watching those programs because I was learning something that I knew nothing about. It was like being, Little House on the Prairie is telling stories. It's sort of like reading a book that, obviously it was sort of based in fact, but I enjoyed watching things that were about real things, about real people, about either real animals or, environmental issues or whatever. Like I just loved kind of, I don't know what it was about being drawn to documentaries. It's really interesting. I don't know if I ever like really tried to articulate why I loved documentaries, but maybe I was relatable. That I was like, wow, if this person's really interested in this, then it's a curious way again to follow this natural curiosity about seeing other people, being curious about other things and learning through this film, through these films that we were watching. We'd also in grade school we'd have like video or, film days. And I remember in one class that we got to choose, like each student like got to choose, we'd watch one a week or something. And, there was a student you could choose which film you would, and they'd have a whole thing. And I would, of course, always choose like the animal documentary or something. And then everybody was always like, oh, that's my favorite. I want to watch that again. So I think kids really, I don't know. It's just somehow relatable to real people. I don't know that I could articulate it anymore.
What about animals? Do they have a place in your life? You mentioned spending time on the ranch in Oklahoma with your grandparents. Were there horses to be ridden and dogs to play with?
No, we had horses. Yeah, we had a horse camp. I remember a horse camp, Girl Scout camp. Horses not at my mother's camp, but in another camp, another Girl Scout camp. I did that for several years running. We had dogs growing up. I don't know. I think animals always were definitely a part of my life. At one point, I really thought that I was going to be really interested in doing natural history documentaries, mostly about animals. But I think once I started working with human subjects, I found that more approachable and more relatable, actually. But animals were always a big part of our lives growing up. We would adopt animals, or animals would show up at our doorstep, and they would be. Often we'd only have just like one dog, one cat, so it wasn't like a whole menagerie. But coincidentally, like one dog would pass, and then like a week later, a cat would come up to the back door. It was stray, and so we'd have this sort of rotating like menagerie that was really interestingly timed. So talk about spirituality. That was kind of like was one dog reincarnated into this cat because the cat acted a lot like the dog, but they obviously never met. But so I don't know. That's an interesting question about animals and I think, again, my parents were very kind to animals, and I think I picked up on the kindness. I think I picked up on that they're sentient beings that deserve, our love and attention. And what they give us back is also, pretty much the definition of unconditional love. And I think that was a good lesson that we learned growing up with animals.
And it sounds as if they really enriched your life with all of these traits, these personality traits, and their kindness, their leadership, their generosity of spirit.
Yes. Yeah.
That must be so ingrained in you now as you raise your own child, Iris, who I'm sure could not be named anything else other than Iris, that you and your husband, Peter, now are blessed with. Do you feel that motherhood has become instinctive to you, given the way that you were raised?
Yes, absolutely. I have always thought I wanted to be a mother, and as I got older and older, I was sort of that glimpse of, or that the possibility got smaller and smaller. And just several years ago, when we started to really seriously talk about, we were looking at adoption. I could never get pregnant, and we looked at adoption. We looked at all sorts of different options, and we just decided surrogacy was the best for us. And then it started to become a reality, and now it's a reality. We're like, I knew eventually I'd become a mother, whether it was we have two dogs, two cats. So it was like mother to them, but also like I really knew from the get go that I needed to be a mom. I needed to be a mother. I love being a cinematographer, but I also knew one of the other roles in my life was to be a mother. And, I was sort of unofficial mother to a lot of people's kids, so I thought, okay, if I don't have my own, then I've done, great job with my other friends' kids. And, I was very involved with a lot of, several of my close friends' children. But now being a mom, I get it. I was like, oh, thank God I didn't give up on this. I would encourage anybody that is, looking to, it's not easy at all and incredibly, taxing financially, emotionally, sleep deprivation, the whole nine yards, but it's the best job ever. It really is. It's beautiful to see her absorbing the world, like, and experiencing the world for the very first time, like being able to introduce her to the things that I love, the things that she's going to learn to love, that she just seeing the world through her eyes is so refreshing and so grounding. It's just a beautiful thing. I mean, I think any parent can tell you that it's just this beautiful experience that you get to relive your own childhood, but also redo some of the things that you loved as a child, but also maybe didn't get or want to do more of, it's wonderful. I mean, again, I'm just sad that my parents aren't around to meet her. That said, I do believe that they are here with us in spirit. So I believe that, they come in the form of a bird or a butterfly or a hummingbird or whatever. There's lots of forms that my family comes back and visits. And so we've been to various gardens and here around the house that, I'm just taking a walk outside and here's a bird and a butterfly, or here's a hummingbird and a bumblebee or something. So I'm like, oh, they're here, they're visiting you. They're coming to say hi. So it's nice to feel them and feel their presence. The people who aren't here with me here on this earth, they're still here with us, in our hearts, and they're still with us. There's two things I'll share about the name. Obviously, Iris is a part of a camera, right? That was an important part for us. I really wanted a sort of vintage botanical name. There's just sort of like a rose or lily or a daisy, and then my husband and I were just sort of going through the list, and we looked at Iris and we're like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect name. But my mother, growing up in Phoenix, and I lived in the same house my entire life. 127 East Glen here in Phoenix, there in Phoenix. And it was amazing. It was, in the suburbs. And she had a green thumb, an avid gardener, was able to, in the Arizona heat, grow beautiful, tall, purple bearded iris. These gorgeous, gorgeous iris blooms would come every spring. And when she passed, my brother brought several iris bulbs from the house to my house. And now they are flourishing in my yard. And iris grow in a bulb, and for every few years, you have to kind of just, they divide and they expand a little bit. So you get more and more each season. And so you have to kind of spread them around your yard. And I've given them to friends. And so, but the iris, my mother's iris they gift us these gorgeous blooms at my home in Los Angeles every year. And also at several other people's homes in the area. But I love the idea of that. I love that kind of metaphor for life going on, but also iris is just such a beautiful memory of my mom. That's so her name is not only a nod to my mother and her ability to grow irises in the heat of Arizona, but also a nod to my cinematography, my profession. But and it suits her. It really suits her. She's a beautiful girl and just a beautiful flower in our lives.
I've interviewed countless, hundreds of athletes in my career, Shana, and when they become mothers, their perspective changes. Invariably, they will say their priorities change, their perspective changes. Have you found any difference in the way, since Iris has been in your life, of how you view the world and your career goals.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother podcast. This mother, artist mothers, like, cause I'll do a short version because I do have some serious thoughts about like, being in my industry too, being a mother. It's a little, there are preconceived notions about mothers not being able to do X, Y, and Z, but it's absolutely not true. I think you start to get more motivated to be able to provide for this person, for this human, but you also want to be around for them. So it's a little bit of a quandary. When she was 2 months old, I was on a job in Chicago. My husband was able to, work from home and was able to bring her. We all were in Chicago for 3 months during that show. And it was wonderful to be able to have her with us, have her with me in Chicago. Otherwise, normally when I'm on location, I'm alone or, but it was really nice to have her with us, in Chicago, to see her grow and see her, put her to bed every night and or at least wake up with her. Sometimes if we shoot late, I didn't get to put her to bed, but I was able to wake up with her. But it does change your perspective. It changes it. It sort of, it instantly clarifies your priorities. It's like, I think before baby was really focused on, really what the next, like 10 years would be professionally. Like I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to direct more. I want to really just focus on like, earning as much money as I can. And, let's get directing and let's like really like, nose to the grindstone, like, let's go, and I still have that same kind of drive. But that said, I'm a mother now and I feel like my work is amazing and I love it and it's creatively satisfying and I will never stop working. But she's a priority now. She and her upbringing and her development is a very important job in my life right now. So it's hard to make that equivalent or more than my work job. And that's I think the quandary that I mean, women and men, I think have the same thing, but maybe it's, the traditions of women kind of staying at home and raising children is like not a thing anymore, but it still is in the back of my brain that I would love to stay home and raise a child. But also like, I have this desire to tell stories. I have a desire to go out and like as a child, curate the world, my own world through a camera, and satisfy that natural curiosity. But, yes, clarifying priorities. Yes. Loving the ability to shed off all of the stuff that's not important. What people think of me, what people say to me in the grocery store about maybe being an older mom or, I got a comment in the grocery store the other day, like, wow, you're too young to be a grandma. And I was like, well, I'm not a grandma, I'm a mother. And then she was very, very apologetic and just also wanted to hear all about about my daughter and all this stuff. You start to become very, very proud and very protective of this little being that you've created. And you also want to, my priorities too, not only are to provide for her, but also to work on projects that are going to make the world better for her, and I think in my work, particularly my documentary work and my scripted work, working on projects that are life affirming and, educational or enlightening and just making the world a better place. Because if I keep doing that, then the world's going to be a better place and that'll be a better place for her. So I also think too, happy baby, happy mom. I'm talking like 8,000 miles a minute, but about 8,000 different subjects. And this is mom brain right now. So, but I have to say that like happy baby, happy mom, happy baby. And I truly believe that is that if I'm happy, she's going to be happy. Which means that if I need to go and shoot something to satisfy a creative urge or to pay the bills or to pay the bills or whatever, if that makes me happy, then she's going to be happy. And you find ways to, one thing a friend told me before baby was here and I was like, oh, I need parenting advice. And she said, well, it comes down to logistics. It's like, you've got to like logistics about like childcare and schedules and, figuring out which parent's going to do what and this and that. It's like, well, heck, I do that all the time in production. Like there's a lot of translatable skills from production, from film production to parenting. So we've got that kind of down, but I think just trying to focus on myself, on self-care, on also making sure that Shana is happy. Because if Shauna's happy, then baby's happy. And so I think that's another thing that I've talked to other parents about, that sometimes you get so focused on your child's happiness and making sure that they're, everything's taken care of and you kind of forget about yourself. And that's one thing I'm really trying to be more mindful about is, self-care. I mean, that's in general, life in general is, I think, with or without kids, is important to make sure you are cared for first, and the rest of the world kind of will fall into place. But happy Shauna, happy baby. So just trying to focus on that a little more, particularly this month, just a little self-care, getting a little more rest, asking for help, but also it allows me to have a little bit more quality time with her too. And I'm not so frazzled for her, but, she's the love of our lives. She is really, a beautiful source of joy and hope and promise. She's beautiful and I'm so grateful she's in our lives. She's really sweet.
Well, I'm sure that you are rich in bedtime stories for Iris. And I'm going to just remind you of one which our friend Gretchen shared with me, that you once spent hours on a bus driving across India with Meryl Streep on a shoot with Michelle Obama. I think we could actually have a series of podcasts on your stories and motherhood. And do you want to reflect on that one particular memory for us?
Yes, it was actually Morocco. Yeah, we were on a bus with Meryl Streep. Is this the story you want me to recount?
Please.
Yeah. Really beautiful program that Michelle Obama, her last summer when her husband was the last summer of President Obama's term, they did a program. Michelle's program that year was promoting education in girls' education in developing nations. And one of the programs was in Morocco. And they were doing sort of Michelle Obama was involved. Meryl Streep was involved. Just sort of promoting obviously girls' education. And we'd had a couple of participants in the documentary, and one of them lived quite remotely, like a 6-hour drive from what's the main town in Morocco? Marrakesh? No.
Marrakesh, Agadir.
Tashkent? No. I think it was Marrakesh. And it was about 5-6 hour bus ride, and to drive to this girl's town, this small village that she lived in, and just having a lovely conversation with we all had sort of our various rows, but I remember halfway in, Meryl came and sat, and she just wanted to know all about me, and she was lovely. She was just lovely. Michelle had just been flown in for, a good, literally like a 4-hour event that actually happened the next day. And so it was just Meryl and the film crew and I just going, and Meryl was going to do the interview kind of a one-on-one with this girl in her village with her parents, and which was a beautiful shoot. But it was just lovely just to, kind of hang out with Meryl Streep, on this bus in the middle of Morocco. And she's just lovely. There's this one-on-one. And I think going back to the skills my father shared with me is just treating everybody, even if they're this world-renowned multi-Oscar winning actor, as if they're, they're the everyman, they're just an average person. And so I think a lot of times when you're in this industry, I think you realize that a lot of people at say Meryl Streep's level just want an average they want a normal conversation, not average, but they want a normal conversation. They don't want to be like, oh, tell me about out of Africa, tell me this, tell me that. It's just like, hey, where do you live? And so we were just shooting the breeze, and it was just lovely, lovely conversation. So, and then the next day we Michelle Obama flew in, and we had this lovely event, and Michelle was amazing. And again, this program, this education for developed nations for girls is so important. And it was wonderful for her to be able to highlight that. Michelle was very tall and had these high heels on. And I remember trying to get to the tip top of my tripod to try to get like a portrait of her. We were doing portraits of everybody, of all the girls and of Meryl and everybody else. And Michelle was just so tall. And she's like, do you want me to take my heels off? Cause I would, you don't have to ask twice, cause she would have been in heels all day and in Morocco in the heat. And so she took her heels off, which was very helpful. But she was just lovely. So things like these little moments in life that are like, wow, I met Michelle Obama and hung out with Meryl Streep in the bus. And, Gretchen's got 8,000 stories also of just, these wonderful trips to places that people don't get to visit,
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I recently taught taught some master classes in Ethiopia, in 2 cities in Ethiopia, and to young filmmakers there. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful to be able to kind of share my skills and I mentor several people here through different organizations, through the academy, through my ASC, through my alma mater, Loyola Marymount. It's wonderful to be able to pass along the craft of storytelling to the next generation, because I feel like it's so important. So in Ethiopia or here in the US, it's just, I love sharing my knowledge with people, because it's wonderful to tell stories, but it's wonderful to be able to light that little spark or feed that fuel. Most people that come to these master classes or mentees already have this sort of spark, but giving them fuel for their own fires and lighting that kind of creativity inside them and really, helping them discover their own voices, is really fun for me. And again, sharing this technical and all the sort of tips and tricks and secrets and things that I've learned along the way, to again help them kind of discover their own voices is the way that we are going to ensure that this craft, this filmmaking craft, will keep evolving and keep alive or staying alive for generations to come. And that's important to me, because I think it's a really valid, really wonderful way to tell stories. And I think it needs to continue. There's so many avenues.
There's your mother coming through, isn't it? What your mum taught you.
Yeah, exactly.
To be that leader, that teacher, that mentor.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. I think everybody needs an encouragement, a spotlight, and also like some validation. So I think that's one thing I really give to my mentees. Like, hey, you're doing great. Everybody's voice is valid. Everybody's, going to tell you X, Y, and Z, but just keep going and keep persevering. I always tell people 99% of what this particular film industry is about is perseverance, sticking with it. You've got, got to stick with it. Also, you have to have, skill and pursue your own kind of like, again, develop your own voice and learn, be proficient with gear, etc. But stick with it and keep. Yeah. But I do love to teach the next generation. I think it's so important.
Summing up now, and it would be hard for me to summarize your incredible resume, Shana, but if I may just remind our listeners that you've been an Oscar nominee and an Oscar winner not once but twice, and you've also been Sundance Film Festival nominee and twice, but for Grand Jury Prize and Best Documentary. Those are, and you've also been a winner. So those are just some of the highlights. I would say the cream on the cake, the icing on the cake. When you look back at your career so far, and so much more to come, but what would be the milestones for you?
Yeah, I think the first milestone for me was, in terms of a cinematographer, was probably the Oscar. The film Breathing Lessons, documentary short, The Life and Work of Mark O'Brien, 1996. Jessica Yu won the Oscar. Being the cinematographer on an Oscar-winning film, to me, that was like, I am a cinematographer now. That was the sort of that night I was like, in my brain shifted from assistant editor, like to cinematographer. That was for me, like, my work has been seen by others and will be seen by more and more people. It had already been at Sundance Film Festival. And that was a huge thing for me. That was my first Sundance Festival, I think in 1985, I believe. And it was a wonderful experience to be able to see your work in front of an audience. People who don't know you, people who don't know anything about the subject, but were just so appreciative and so wonderful. The Q&As afterwards, it was just sort of like the icing on the cake. You make a film. For me, it's about the process of making the film. I love the collaborative process. I love going and meeting a subject. I love going and executing the shoot. I love, all the technical, all the creative, all the blending of art and technology. I love all that, right? The making of the film. But, and once you make it and you hand it off, an editor takes it and you see it and you're like, oh, that's great. I love the process of it. That said, seeing it in front of an audience, like and even getting an Oscar for it, you're like, that is the icing on the cake for me. And that was like the cherry on top of the cherry on the candle. And, it was like so much more than you ever could expect. So, but the Oscar was really the first kind of milestone. I think another milestone for me was, and oftentimes I don't talk about this, but I'm a very proud moment of being the first woman on the show Survivor. As a shooter. There had been other women doing sound and doing post-production, but I was the first woman camera operator on Survivor. And I had done 3 seasons on The Apprentice with Mark Burnett Productions, and I knew some of the people involved in Survivor. And I said, look, I went and I wanted a meeting. And I said, why? I would love to do Survivor. I would. And they were like, why do you want to do it? I said, well, I would like to challenge myself. There's a theme in my work. I think every few years I need to challenge myself. I need to do something new. I need to do something that's like, unlike what I've done before. I need to challenge myself. I need a big, like, what's next kind of thing. So they offered me a shorter stint. My very first Survivor was Survivor Panama, I believe, sometime in the 2000s. And I had a 2-week commitment, and they loved what I did and invited me back for another season and another season and another season. So I did 4 seasons total. And that was a really big deal to me to be the first woman camera operator on Survivor. I think one of the comments that I remember in one of the first couple seasons was that they thought my footage was being shot from a different perspective. It had a different approach to my work in the way that I was covering women, say, or I was covering the emotion of a scene. I don't have any specific examples, but I loved that comment because I'm a woman. I come from, my perspective is different. My sensibilities are different than another woman, but also than a man. I think it was just a unique kind of perspective for them. So they appreciated that and wanted to encourage that and brought me back for a total of 4 seasons, which was great. So that was a really big moment for me. And something also I really wanted to conquer physically. I knew it was a very physical job. The sand fleas and the snow and the sunburn and the crazy hours and all the rest. I knew I needed a physical challenge. But it was great. It's a fantastic learning too, to be under those kinds of conditions, but also ultimately responsible to tell a great story. And oftentimes you're alone. Your producer's off doing interviews or something. So you're, there with the sound mixer and you're just observing, the story and having to bring it back, for an editor to kind of cut a scene together. So you were ultimately responsible for making sure you got all your coverage. So it was great training, so that was a big milestone. Next milestone for me would be as a camera operator on Parks and Recreation. That was the first time I'd done any kind of episodic union work as an operator. It was a little bit of something new, something exciting for me to do in the scripted world in a union, kind of formal union, network television. And again, a great sort of next step for me, using all of my documentary skills in Parks and Recreation, which had a documentary feel already. And so they hired me because I was a documentary cinematographer. They wanted that kind of spontaneity. They wanted that kind of vibe. So it was great to be able to be hired there. I did 4 seasons on that show, which was great, about 60 episodes, 80 episodes. It was wonderful. Fantastic to dip my feet, into that sort of union episodic kind of world. That was something I had always wanted to do. And that was great. Then what's the next? Gosh. And, I think maybe my next milestone would be to have then and then I went on to do a bunch of documentaries, which were amazing. We talked a little bit about The Kingmaker. That was pretty amazing. And then I shot another documentary short called Walk, Run, Cha Cha. And that was nominated for an Oscar in 2020. We did not win, but we had a great time at the Oscars and we had a fantastic opportunity there. And then almost that same year, I got offered my first episodic show as a DP, a show called Welcome to Flatch. And that was produced by Paul Feig of Freaks and Geeks and Bridesmaids fame. So we did 2 seasons on that show, and I was a DP and operator. It was shot mockumentary style, which was amazing. Again, using my documentary skills in that scripted environment in a half-hour network comedy for Fox. And from that job, I ended up getting a series called Somebody Somewhere on HBO, which I'm incredibly proud about. So that was a big chunk of those. I think those two shows are big milestones for me. But somewhere along there, I can't really remember. I think it was 2020, 2021. I also was invited. A huge milestone in my life was being invited to join the American Society of Cinematographers. And the three little letters at the end of my name in credits, ASC, are something I've dreamt about since I was in film school. It's an honorary group. You're invited to join. It's kind of again, a lifelong dream for most people. To be invited based on the majority of my work to that point had been documentaries. And so I was one of just a handful of people that had been invited into that group based on documentary work, predominantly. And it was such a huge honor. Like it's indescribable how just thrilled I was to be invited and now to be an active member. I think the organization has maybe 300 active members. And I'm quite active. I'm a part of several committees, and we have a mentorship program. I did a documentary masterclass a couple of years ago, kind of led that, which was successful. And it's a really, again, a huge honor to be a part of that organization. Another big milestone too is I directed a first episode of my show, Welcome to Flatch, a couple of years ago. I was given the opportunity to direct an episode, and that was amazing. Again, it's sort of like the what's next, the taking on of challenge of something I hadn't done before. And I knew I'd always wanted to direct because I'd been on so many different episodic shows and documentaries, and seen in my decades of work, seen the varying styles of directing, from Michael Apted, who's an incredible director, both in documentaries and in narratives, rest in peace, to, Roy Kennedy and Lauren Greenfield and Jay Duplass and Paul Feig, like names go on and on, just about how different their directing styles were. And I knew that I had the chops. I knew I could do it. I just needed to get the opportunity, and I was presented the opportunity on the show that I was shooting. And that was an amazing opportunity. Muscles I didn't even know I had. I was just creating, new brain synapses. Like the hardest thing for me was to put the camera down, and just really focus on story and actors, and really giving notes to the actors. So I'd love to do more of that. But it was like this incredible thrill and rush to be doing something absolutely new at my stage of my career. So I'm DGA now, and I love that. And I'm hoping to do more directing in the future. But yeah, some significant milestones. And obviously the most recent milestone for me is the birth of my daughter, Iris, in last November. So pretty, yeah. When you boil it down to milestones, it's fun to go back. Also, like, excited to see what's in the future.
Yeah, I'm wondering where the signposts lead to now. What you've recently worked on, I know you're credited with the Power of Film this year, 2024. What were your last gigs, and can you talk about anything coming up?
Yes, I think, so Somebody Somewhere is a really big part of my life. So that's the HBO series, the half-hour comedy, dramedy, I think they're calling it. Season 3 will be airing in the fall. And it's critically acclaimed and really, really good show. We recently won a Peabody Award, which is a fantastic honor, noting.
Congratulations. That is something.
Yes. Yes. We were nominated last year and then nominated and won this year. So, really great to get the nod from the Peabody Committee. So that's in the fall. And then there's a couple projects coming up. I can't talk too much about. Let me see what else, what can I talk about? Recently, I did the Return to Space documentary, which was amazing. Right after COVID hit, Elon Musk was still doing SpaceX, amazing things with SpaceX, shooting NASA astronauts into space. But we documented his sort of first year of doing that. So that was incredible, a really incredible experience to be in the firing room as they were, launching rockets with humans for the first time since the space shuttle missions. What's coming up? My goodness. Because of the strikes, it's been a little slow. It's been last year was just really bad, not only for obviously the scripted world, but in the documentary world, things have been a little, people have been a little hesitant to greenlight projects, but I've definitely got something coming up. I can't talk about it, but there are some really exciting, it's a documentary, and some really exciting interviews, an issue that is very important to us as Americans, to world for sure, but something that's happening in the United States right now that, again, I love being involved with, getting back to spunkiness or to that Spitfire like the firecracker, getting, it's an issue that it's close to my heart, but I'm not allowed to talk about it, but that's exciting to be involved with it. And, it'll be something that I think will be hopefully affecting great change, here in the States.
Shana, I would love to do lots more podcasts with you. There is so much to talk about.
Well, like you said, everybody has a story, and I've just been really, really lucky in my life so far to have done some really amazing things in my work and also in my life in general. I love what I do, but I also love having adventures in my real life as well. And now my greatest adventure so far with the baby, so I get to sort of rediscover a lot of the things that are fun for me. Something as basic as a butterfly exhibit there at the Natural History Museum, which we're going to go to again this weekend. And, my love of butterflies, but also just sharing that with her we're taking swimming lessons to, share mom's love of swimming. And, it's great. And Dad loves dinosaurs. We're going to again, Natural History Museum is a great thing for us. So we're going back she loves the dinosaurs. She's only 8 months, but she's like looking up at them going, wow, so that my husband loves archaeology and all that. So it's fun to share our loves with our new baby. So yeah, lots ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us on this podcast. Shana, it's been great fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris.
I'm Gretchen Worthen, and I have been a cinematographer for 20 years. I also started the Instagram account Lady Camera Guy, and I'm very excited to announce that I have expanded Lady Camera Guy into a website, which I am launching. And on that website, you will find links to resources, products, and helpful information. We're also starting a newsletter, and you can sign up for that newsletter on the ladycameraguy.com webpage by scrolling all the way to the bottom. Type in your email address, and you will have signed up. Again, that web address is ladycameraguy.com. Feel free to follow us on Instagram at ladycameraguy. And please do drop your email in the address bar and sign up for our newsletter.
And that's our show for this week. Don't forget to scroll down the show notes to get links to Shana's IMDb, to her website, and to her Instagram. And you can also find us on Instagram at The Art Podcast. Don't forget that's art with 2 A's, where you can leave your comments, questions, and suggestions for guests. We always love to hear from you. And if you are listening on Apple iTunes, as always, we would love it if you would leave a 5-star review. And of course, that helps others find the show because it raises our visibility among all the many thousands of podcasts. My thanks again to my guest this week, Shana Hagan, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the painter, singer, and poet, Jamie Durr. So I do hope you'll join me then.